This is the model we have to talk about congestion pricing. It could be traffic congestion, or there are other kinds of fishing, like fishing congestion as well. But basically the idea of congestion is we get in each other's way. And so this is like miles here, traffic flow. And this is dollars here. And if I were to take a car from here and drive to the railway station, there's a cost to me of doing that. And my private cost, if there's very little traffic here, then my private cost just depends on the payment for the car and the petrol or whatever other fuel I'm using. But eventually, if there's a lot of traffic flow, then my costs start going up, because it will take me longer time to get to the railway station. And if it takes a longer time, I'm losing time, so there's a time cost. And also, eventually the amount of petrol I use will go up. If the speed is really slow, at the limit, if it's like creeping, a kilometer an hour, then the petrol cost actually gets very high per mile. So there's an increase in it. So this is my marginal private cost. It's also if I take this trip, not only will it take me time, particularly if the traffic is intense, but then I will make the traffic flow even worse. So there may be 1,000 other motorists who will be delayed by a few seconds or minutes each because I take my car. That's a classical case of an externality. And I don't know how much people think about that. I think people think a lot about the private costs. I don't know if they consider the fact that they will be delaying other people. So we have a marginal social cost that is higher and eventually rises faster. And some people actually manage to draw these so they kind of, they stand backwards. You can derive these. It's nice. People build these models. Imagine the town is just like one circular road, and then you can calculate actually what happens if you have more cars on that road. There's some technical aspects to this, because if the cars are very close to each other, they can't go very fast for the relationship between speed and number of cars. And then you can add in the environmental cost. When you go really slow, then your exhausts actually get worse. Engines are designed to go, optimally. Well, it depends what engine you have, but really nice modern cars get around this problem. Like some of the hybrid electric cars, for instance. One of the ideas there is you have a motor that actually is running in an optimal way, and then it's charging a battery, and then you can switch that motor off, and you can run just from the battery. So you get around it. But if you have an old or normal car, then basically you drive very slowly. You also get very high emissions per mile. And so this curve with the total marginal social cost, including the environmental cost, that is also above and steeper than this curve. And then there's the demand for traffic. And this is the social optimum. And this is the market solution. The free market with free market is supposed to be good. But the problem here is the free market with no property rights to the air and to the space. So there is no owner, there is no transaction, there's no payment. And so that's the fundamental reason why the sort of the unregulated solution is not equal to the optimal one. If all the roads were privately owned and if all the air was privately owned, there would be markets and you would have to pay. And we would create an optimal solution. Well, it's actually kind of physically hard to imagine how that would work, but. And now, just like we did before, all these areas here can be identified and talked about. That's the nice thing about this diagram. So there's little letters here all over the place, and you can look. I want to spend 3 hours on this too, but I'm not going to do that. I don't have that time. But just to show you, because you can find there are some motorists who continue driving if you impose a congestion tax. The richer motorists, or the motorists who have to get to the hospital or whatever, they will continue to drive and they will pay a fee. And they will gain some time because there's less congestion, but they have to pay the tax. So they will, let's have a look at those. They will get a benefit ABDC and they pay a cost ABHG. We'll go back. This here is the time gain, and this here is the fee they pay. So this is the net loss. Those motorists actually, in the end, actually pay more than they benefit. And then there are some motorists who give up and stay at home, or travel later in the day, whatever they do. Take the tram. I mean, of course, there's lots of possibilities. And those the motorists who stop driving, they lose consumer surplus, BEH. BEH, consumer surplus loss. But then, of course, this is an optimum, so there's a lot of, there's also victims of pollution who were the victims of pollution, they gain a big area, KMH. You can calculate all this. And you can imagine, you can make this more detailed if this was your job. You know, design a congestion scheme for Gothenburg. Well, there's more. You might want to distinguish between the people who live in the center and the less wealthy people who live in some suburb, and they're going to have to pass through the center, they're going to have to pay. And so these details matter. The pricing scheme in Stockholm, for instance, almost collapsed because of people on an island called Lidingö who they're actually kind of wealthy, but the island, the geography is such that they can't go anywhere without passing through Stockholm. So they feel, we don't want to go to Stockholm, but we have to, for the geography, and then they have to pay this congestion fee, and they get upset. And if they vote against the scheme and whatever, these things decide the politics, the distributional effects. And I just want to make a simple point. The combination of 2 points. We care about efficiency. The efficiency is improved by a scheme like this. But if the scheme is going to happen or not depends on politics, and the politics depends on distribution. And we can figure out the distribution quite easily if we just sort of sit down and do it, and a lot of economists don't, so kind of just sufficient content in sort of saying, oh, this will improve overall efficiency. But that's not enough. To understand a scheme like this, we have to look at who wins and who loses. So that's one thing I wanted to say, and I hope you'll read more about it. And yeah, in Stockholm and Gothenburg, it's differentiated a little bit by time. And we also have very low fees in Stockholm and Gothenburg. In London, you pay, what was it now, £15 or something, a sizable amount of money. It's drive-in. It's drive-in and yeah. An optimum fee would instead be how much you drive inside the city, right? Because driving in once and then parking is not the same thing as driving around like the whole day. So really you should have something like a taximeter in each car. That's not very expensive. I mean, taxis have that. taximeter, and then you measure how far the car drives. And it would be more expensive if you drive in the center than in the, so you could imagine the optimal fee for a car, the optimal tax, is a function, but I won't write function, I'll write a simple function. I'll just say that it's a function of how many miles you drive, in what area. So then we have to kind of, so some areas like the center of town should be 10 times more expensive, or 100 times, and then the town should be 10 times, and then the countryside should be just say factor 1 or something. And then you might want to have the time of day, or whatever, like the number of miles you drive in the center during rush hours, because this is, and so then you have the sum over, time and area. And then, well, electric cars shouldn't be paying the same as really old lorries, and so you would really like to have an emission coefficient for your particular car, and so the fee for electric cars, they do contribute to congestion. They get in the way of the other cars and make the other cars drive slower, and so they should be paying something, but of course they should be paying less than an old lorry with a lot of smoke coming out of it. So I've written a couple of times articles like this saying, either with words or with functions, this should be the optimal fee. And the first time, people said, oh my goodness, this guy is moving, that sounds very complicated. The second time I wrote an article like that, I got companies phoning me saying, we have the equipment that can do that. And now that equipment is already in the cars. I mean, most taxis and a lot of private cars already have a GPS. The car knows where it is. So we have AI. We know the time, that's a clock, that's quite simple. The cars are certified and inspected every year, so we know their emission profile. It would not be very difficult to build an algorithm into a GPS that charged each car this. But that's not what we're doing. We're paying 15 kroner just to go into past the camera somewhere. It's very simple scheme. Well, I think even that can be solved by the intelligence that is. If you think you have now a GPS on your screen that shows you the road and your path, and it could also say 10 kroner per hour or something. If there could be a number telling. I mean, you could think you would simplify this function, which is really not linear or whatever. But of course, you would simplify it, and you'd have a number of kroner per hour. And maybe this road that goes into the center of the town would sort of be marked with like 100 kroner per hour or something. I think that would be quite. Which is partly good, because they would not drive into the center, but drive around the center. Like many towns, there are, if you want to go from Malmö, Copenhagen to Oslo, you kind of have to go through Gothenburg, which means that we have a lot of lorries, long distance lorries going through Gothenburg. We don't really want that. I mean, we want them to go around. Well, so sometimes that's good. But it's true, I mean, you get to the perverse place. Today, one of the instruments that we really have, and I think too much of, sometimes I sound like I'm doing an antique car. So I have sometimes had the question, someone like the Motorist Association said, have you got something nice to say about, like, for us motorists? And I have an answer. There's one thing. I think they can get rid of parking fees, or reduce them a lot. From an environmental point of view, the best thing that can happen to the car is to stand still. parking should be encouraged. Now we have very high parking fees, and people drive around a lot looking for cheaper parking, which is really bad. Oh, I'm so glad you said that. So you're an engineer. Good. Here's a car. Oh, here's a car that is parked. It's true, it requires space. But here's a car that is driving on the road. It takes space too, doesn't it? I don't think it's true that parked cars take any particular amount of space. I think all cars take space. In fact, cars, when they are driving, they require more space, because when they're parked, they just require this space. When they're driving, you can't really use the space that is right in front of the car either. So they actually require quite a lot of space when they drive. So I think I have heard a lot of people, particularly in big towns. I don't know about that. In big towns, people drive go to the theater, and it can cost like 100 kroner an hour close to the theater. They would deposit their wife at the theater, and they would drive around and try to find parking. I've been in that situation as a passenger usually, quite a lot of times. That happens a lot in big towns. Anyway, kind of joking, but I do think that we overcharge parking, and that it would be better if we took, because as soon as a car comes into Gothenburg, it takes space. There's no way that a car does not require whatever square meters, you know, whether it's parked or driving, it's using space in Gothenburg. It's not using more space when it stands still. So we could charge them for the parking straight away. As soon as they drive into Gothenburg, they're using space in Gothenburg. So we could charge them that, and then take away the parking fees. Or at least reduce the parking fees. Anyway, it's kind of it's nice to have something nice to say remotely. So I think I wanted to speak to you about the double dividend. There isn't time for that, but I have one more lecture when I'll talk about the IPCC, I guess. I'll be coming back from that. And I'll speak a bit about the double dividend. You can certainly read about it.